What does the Bible say about its authenticity? The New Testament Gospels, which include the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are presented as documents reporting on historical occurrences. Now, imagine for a moment if you found a book written by an Englishman in the 21st century, and he states this is an original historical account of what happened in 3rd century China. You'd be right to doubt its authenticity. However, the Gospels were written as eyewitness historical accounts by the contemporaries of Jesus, who had direct access to the information they were writing about. For example, the Gospel of Luke begins, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses." Luke 1, 1-2. Repeatedly, the Gospel writers state that they are attempting to give an account of facts, things that they're eyewitnesses to, or that were collected from eyewitnesses. C.S. Lewis, a formerly atheistic professor at Oxford and Cambridge and an expert on ancient mythology, said, "As a literary historian, I am perfectly convinced that whatever else the Gospels are, they are not legends. I have read a great deal of legend, and I am quite clear that they are not the same sort of things." In 2 Peter 1:16 it says, "We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of His majesty." 1 John 1:3 says, "We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard." And additionally in John 19:35 it says, "He knows that He tells the truth, and He testifies that you also may believe." In advocating their case for the gospel, the apostles appealed to common knowledge about Jesus, even when talking to their strongest opponents. They not only said, "Look, we saw this," or "we heard that," but they turned the tables around on adverse critics and said, "You also know about these things. You saw them. You yourselves know about it." One had better be careful when he says to his opposition, "You know this also," because if he isn't right in the details, it'll be shoved right down his throat. Acts 26:26 says, "For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly, for I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner." Additionally, Timothy Keller, an American pastor and theologian, has the following to say about the various embarrassing facts included in the New Testament. Why would the leaders of the early Christian movement have made up the story of the crucifixion if it didn't happen? Any listener of the gospel in either Greek or Jewish culture would have automatically suspected that anyone who had been crucified was a criminal, whatever the speaker said to the contrary. Why would any Christian make up the account of Jesus asking God in the Garden of Gethsemane if he can get out of his mission? Or why ever make up the part on the cross when Jesus cries out that God had abandoned him? These things would have only offended or deeply confused first century prospective converts. They would have concluded that Jesus was weak and failing as God. Why invent women as the first witnesses of the resurrection in a society where women were assigned such low status that their testimony was not admissible evidence in court? It would have made far more sense, if you're inventing the tale, to have male pillars of the community present as witnesses when Jesus came out of the tomb. The only plausible reason that all of these incidents would be included in these accounts is that they actually happened. Also, why constantly depict the apostles, the eventual leaders of the early church, as petty and jealous, almost impossibly slow-witted, and in the end as cowards who either actively or passively failed their master? Richard Bauckham makes similar arguments about the depiction of Peter's denial of Jesus, even to the point of his calling down a curse on his master. Why would anyone in the early church want to play up the terrible failures of their most prominent leader?